The sun blazed over Windsor Castle on a sweltering July afternoon in 2023 as crowds of tourists gathered to witness the timeless spectacle of the Royal Guards. Among these visitors was James Thompson, a 35-year-old American tourist from Texas who had been in London for just 3 days with his group of college friends. Thompson and his 4 friends had started their day early, planning to explore the historic Windsor Castle. However, their morning took an unexpected turn when they decided to visit several local pubs along the way. By 2 p.m., Thompson had consumed multiple pints of beer, and his behavior. The group finally arrived at Windsor Castle around 2:30 p.m., joining the thick crowd of visitors from all over the world. Children sat on their parents' shoulders, trying to get a better view of the guards in their famous red uniforms and tall bearskin hats. Tourist guides explained the rich history of the castle and the significance of the Queen's Guards to attentive listeners. Thompson, however, was far from attentive. His face was flushed red from the alcohol, and he kept stumbling into other tourists, earning disapproving looks from families and elderly visitors. His friends, Mark Wilson and Peter Roberts, tried several times to calm him down, but Thompson brushed off their concerns with loud laughter. "Man, these guards look ridiculous in those funny hats," Thompson shouted, causing nearby visitors to turn and stare. "I bet I can make them laugh." He pulled out his phone and started recording, pushing his way through the crowd to get closer to the guards. Private William Hayes, a 23-year-old member of the Queen's Guard, stood at his post with the characteristic stillness that the guards are famous for. He had been serving in the guards for 2 years and had dealt with his fair share of troublesome tourists. However, something about Thompson's aggressive approach made this situation feel different. The atmosphere around the castle grounds began to shift. Regular visitors who had been enjoying the sunny afternoon started moving away from Thompson's vicinity. A group of Japanese tourists who had been taking photos quickly packed their cameras and stepped back. Parents pulled their children closer, sensing the building tension. Thompson's friends made one last attempt to intervene. Mark grabbed his arm and said, "Come on, man, let's go get some water. You're making a scene." But Thompson shook him off, his attention fixed solely on Private Hayes. 2 police officers stationed nearby had already noticed the commotion and began moving closer to the scene. They had dealt with drunk tourists before, but protocol required them to let situations play out unless there was immediate danger. They maintained their distance while keeping a watchful eye on Thompson. Several other tourists had their phones out now, recording the unfolding scene. Among them was Sarah Chen, a 19-year-old student from Singapore, who would later provide crucial video evidence to the authorities. "I just had a feeling something bad was going to happen," she would later tell reporters. "The way he was acting, it was clear he wasn't going to stop." The temperature had reached 85 degrees Fahrenheit, and Private Hayes stood perfectly still in his thick ceremonial uniform. Sweat trickled down his face beneath his bearskin hat, but his expression remained impassive. His training had prepared him for situations like this, but the growing hostility in Thompson's behavior was becoming increasingly concerning. A mother with 2 young children approached one of the police officers and whispered something, pointing at Thompson. The officer nodded and spoke quietly into his radio, calling for additional backup. By now, Thompson had been causing a disturbance for nearly 15 minutes. The crowds at Windsor Castle had thinned considerably around Thompson's location, creating an unusual empty space in what was normally a packed tourist area. His friend stood a few feet away, embarrassed and unsure of what to do next. Peter was on his phone, apparently trying to book a taxi to get Thompson away from the castle. The scene had all the ingredients of an impending incident: an intoxicated tourist, frustrated friends unable to control him, concerned onlookers, alert police officers, and a dutiful royal guard maintaining his composure despite the escalating situation. The historic walls of Windsor Castle had witnessed centuries of events, but what was about to unfold would soon make headlines around the world. As the clock struck 3 p.m., the tension in the air was palpable. Nobody in the crowd could have predicted that within the next few minutes, they would witness an incident that would result in the fastest sentencing of a tourist in British legal history and serve as a powerful reminder about respecting British traditions and institutions. The stage was set for what would become an infamous moment in Windsor Castle's recent history. As the situation at Windsor Castle continued to escalate, James Thompson's behavior became increasingly erratic. Standing just 15 feet from Private Hayes, he began a series of taunts that would later be described in court documents as deliberately provocative and disrespectful. "Hey, Mr. Guard," Thompson called out, his words slightly slurred. "Do you guys ever get tired of looking like toy soldiers?" He walked in an exaggerated march, mimicking the guard's famous ceremonial walk. Several tourists gasped at his disrespectful display, while others quickly moved their children away from the scene. Thompson's friend Mark made one final attempt to intervene. "James, you're going to get us all in trouble," he pleaded, placing a hand on Thompson's shoulder. "Let's just go back to the hotel." But Thompson shrugged him off with such force that Mark stumbled backward, nearly falling into a group of French tourists. Private Hayes maintained his professional composure, staring straight ahead as his training demanded. Despite the summer heat and the increasingly hostile situation, his face remained expressionless. His only visible reaction was a slight tightening of his grip on his ceremonial rifle. The crowd had now formed a wide semicircle around Thompson, with many tourists recording the scene on their phones. Sarah Chen, still filming, captured Thompson's next actions in perfect detail. He began dancing around in front of the guard, waving his hands in front of Private Hayes' face and attempting to take selfies with him. "I bet you're dying to punch me, aren't you?" Thompson taunted, his face just inches from the guards. "Come on, show some emotion. Are you even real?" The smell of alcohol on his breath was strong enough that Private Hayes could detect it, though his expression never wavered. Two American teenagers in the crowd, Emma and Jack Peterson, who were visiting with their parents, watched in horror. "Dad, can't someone stop him?" Emma whispered. Her father reassured her that the police would handle the situation, though his own expression showed concern about how the scene was unfolding. The police officers had now moved closer, positioning themselves strategically around the area. Officer Sarah Matthews, a veteran of the Windsor Police Force, spoke quietly into her radio. "Potential situation at Northgate. Subject appears heavily intoxicated. Requesting additional units." Thompson's friends had retreated to the edge of the crowd, their faces red with embarrassment. Peter was still trying to arrange transportation, while Mark filmed the scene, knowing they might need evidence of what was happening for legal purposes. A British couple in their 60s, the Wilsons, who had been visiting Windsor Castle for their anniversary, watched the scene with growing anger. "In all my years," Mrs. Wilson muttered to her husband, "I've never seen such disrespect for our traditions." Thompson then pulled out a fresh can of beer from his backpack, cracking it open right in front of the guard. This action caused several people in the crowd to point and alert the police officers. Drinking alcohol on castle grounds was strictly prohibited, and signs stating this rule were clearly posted throughout the area. "Want a sip, soldier boy?" Thompson sneered, waving the can in front of Private Hayes' face. The guard's training was being tested to its limits, but he maintained his stoic demeanor. Years of discipline and practice had prepared him for situations like this, though few had ever escalated to this level. The atmosphere grew increasingly tense as Thompson began to circle the guard like a predator stalking its prey. His movements became more aggressive, his taunts more personal. "What's wrong? Can't handle a little fun. Are all British soldiers this boring?" Private Hayes, despite the provocation, stood firm. His eyes remained fixed forward, his posture perfect, embodying centuries of military tradition. Other tourists watched in admiration of his self-control, even as Thompson's behavior became more outrageous. A group of visiting school children from a local primary school were quickly ushered away by their teachers, who had decided the situation was becoming too unpredictable. The children's wide-eyed faces showed a mix of fear and confusion at the unfolding scene. As the situation approached its breaking point, the air was thick with tension. The crowd held its collective breath, sensing that Thompson's next action would cross a line from which there would be no return. The police officers had their hands ready on their radios, prepared for what might come next. No one in the crowd could have predicted just how quickly the situation would escalate, or how severely Thompson would pay for his next action. The stage was set for a moment that would soon make international headlines and change how tourist behavior around royal guards would be handled forever. What happened next would be replayed on news channels worldwide and viewed millions of times on social media. The incident, captured from multiple angles by tourists' phones and the castle's security cameras, unfolded in a matter of seconds but would have lasting consequences. Thompson, still holding his beer can, had worked himself into a state of complete defiance. The alcohol in his system had stripped away any remaining sense of judgment. His face was red with anger at the guard's continued stoicism, frustrated by his inability to provoke a reaction from Private Hayes. "You think you're better than me?" Thompson shouted, his voice echoing across the castle grounds. "Let's see how you like this." Without warning, he raised the half-full can of beer above his head. The crowd gasped collectively, realizing what was about to happen. Sarah Chen's video captured the moment perfectly, the arc of the beer can through the air, the golden liquid catching the sunlight as it sprayed outward. Time seemed to slow down as the can spiraled toward Private Hayes. The beer struck Private Hayes directly in the chest, soaking his pristine red uniform. The cold liquid splashed across his face and dripped down his ceremonial bearskin hat. Some of the spray hit nearby tourists, including a young family with 2 small children who screamed in surprise. For a split second, absolute silence fell over the crowd. Even Thompson seemed shocked by his own actions, his mouth hanging open as he stared at the wet guard. Private Hayes remained motionless, beer dripping from his uniform, his discipline never wavering even in this extreme situation. Then everything happened at once. The armed police officers who had been watching sprang into action with military precision. Officer Matthews reached Thompson first, grabbing his arms and pulling them behind his back while her partner, Officer Johnson, moved to secure the area. "You're under arrest," Officer Matthews announced firmly as she clicked the handcuffs around Thompson's wrists. The reality of the situation seemed to finally hit Thompson, and his face drained of color. "It was just a joke," Thompson protested, struggling against the handcuffs. "I didn't mean anything by it." His words were met with angry mutters from the crowd, who had quickly turned hostile toward him. Private Hayes' replacement arrived within minutes, allowing him to leave his post with dignity. As he marched away, the crowd broke into spontaneous applause for his remarkable composure under such extreme provocation. Thompson's friends watched in horror as he was led away by the police. Mark approached the officers, trying to apologize, but was firmly told to step back. Peter stood frozen, still holding his phone, having captured the entire incident on video. Mrs. Wilson, the elderly tourist who had been watching earlier, approached one of the remaining officers. "I saw everything," she said firmly. "That young man has been harassing the guard for nearly half an hour. I'd be happy to provide a statement." Several other witnesses, including Sarah Chen with her crucial video evidence, also came forward to offer their accounts to the police. The Japanese tourist group, who had captured clear photos of the entire sequence of events, provided their memory cards to the authorities. As Thompson was led to the waiting police car, he had begun to cry, the gravity of his actions finally sinking in. His previous bravado had completely disappeared, replaced by visible fear and regret. The crowd watched silently as he was placed in the back of the police vehicle. Cleanup crews quickly arrived to deal with the spilled beer, and castle staff worked efficiently to restore order to the area. Tourists were politely asked to move along, though many lingered, discussing what they had just witnessed. Private Hayes, after changing into a fresh uniform, provided his statement to castle authorities. His commanding officer later commended him for maintaining perfect composure throughout the incident, noting that his behavior exemplified the highest standards of the Queen's Guard. Within 20 minutes of the incident, Thompson was being processed at the Windsor police station. His friends remained at the castle, giving their statements to the police and trying to comprehend how their tourist visit had gone so horribly wrong. News of the incident spread quickly through social media, with videos of the beer-throwing incident going viral within hours. What nobody knew yet was that Thompson's punishment would be equally swift and unprecedented, setting a new precedent for how such offenses would be handled in the future. The stage was now set for one of the fastest prosecutions in British legal history, as the judicial system prepared to make an example of the American tourist who dared to assault a member of the Queen's Guard. The police car carrying James Thompson sped through the streets of Windsor, its blue lights flashing but sirens silent. Inside, Thompson sat hunched in the back seat, the reality of his situation finally piercing through his alcoholic haze. Officer Matthews sat in the passenger seat, already making calls to set an extraordinary legal process in motion. At exactly 3:45 p.m., Thompson arrived at Windsor Police Station, Unlike the typical slow-moving bureaucracy of the justice system, his case was about to move at unprecedented speed. Chief Inspector Richard Barnes had already been briefed about the incident and was waiting at the station entrance. "Get him processed immediately," Barnes ordered as Thompson was led inside. "The magistrate has agreed to an emergency session." Hearing process was moving with military precision. Sarah Chen's video had already been transferred to police devices, along with footage from 12 other tourist phones and 4 security cameras. The witness statements were being collected rapidly, with castle staff efficiently organizing the process. Thompson's friends stood in a daze near the castle gates, still trying to process what had happened. Mark Wilson was on the phone with the American embassy, but received little sympathy. "We can confirm your friend's detention," the embassy official told him, "but given the nature of the offense, we cannot intervene in the legal process." At the police station, Thompson was placed in a holding cell while officers prepared the charging documents. The alcohol was wearing off, replaced by growing fear. Through the small window in his cell door, you could see officers moving with unusual urgency, papers being passed quickly from hand to hand. Private Hayes had arrived at the station to give his formal statement. Still in his pristine replacement uniform, he sat straight-backed in the interview room, delivering his account with military precision. "The suspect appeared intoxicated and deliberately provocative," he stated calmly. "He proceeded to throw a beer can at me, striking my uniform and face." Social media was already exploding with the incident. The hashtag Windsor Beer Thrower was trending in the UK, with Sarah Chen's video being shared thousands of times per minute. News vans began arriving outside the police station, their satellite dishes reaching into the darkening sky. Thompson's booking process was completed in record time. His fingerprints were taken, his possessions catalogued, and his rights explained to him. A duty solicitor, Margaret Hughes, arrived at 4:15 p.m., looking somewhat flustered at the speed of proceedings. "Mr. Thompson," Hughes said as she entered his cell, "I need you to understand the seriousness of your situation. The Crown takes offenses against the Royal Guard extremely seriously. They're pushing for immediate prosecution." In a small office nearby, Chief Inspector Barnes was speaking with the Crown Prosecution Service. "We have multiple video angles," he explained. "The evidence is overwhelming. No need for a lengthy investigation." The castle's head of security, Colonel James Whitmore, arrived at the station with additional documentation about the historic significance of the Queen's Guard and the legal protections they're afforded. His presence underscored the seriousness with which the authorities were treating the incident. Thompson's friends had finally made their way to the police station, were told they couldn't see him. They huddled in the waiting area, watching as more officials in formal attire rushed past them into the building's secure area. At 4:30 p.m., just 90 minutes after the incident, the charging decision was made. Thompson would face charges of assault on a protected officer, public disorder, and violation of castle grounds regulations. The magistrate had cleared their schedule for an immediate hearing. News of the expedited process spread quickly through legal circles in Windsor. Several local lawyers gathered outside the station, discussing the unprecedented speed of the proceedings. "I've never seen anything move this fast," one veteran solicitor remarked to a reporter. As the clock struck 4:45 p.m., Thompson was led from his cell toward the transport vehicle that would take him to the courthouse. His face had lost all color, his tourist outfit of shorts and a Hawaiian shirt looking absurdly out of place in the serious legal proceedings. The stage was set for one of the fastest court proceedings in British legal history. In less than 2 hours since throwing his beer, Thompson was about to face British justice at its most efficient. No one present could remember a case moving with such speed, but then again, few had ever shown such blatant disrespect to a Queen's Guard in full public view. The next hour would determine Thompson's fate and set a precedent for how similar offenses would be handled in the future. The Windsor Magistrates' Court, a stately Victorian building, was typically quiet at 5 p.m. However, on this extraordinary evening, lights blazed from every window as staff scrambled to prepare for the emergency session. Magistrate Eleanor Blackwood, known for her no-nonsense approach, had cancelled her evening plans to preside over this unusual case. Thompson arrived at the courthouse at 5:10 p.m., still in his tourist clothes which were now wrinkled from his time in the holding cell. His appearance was a stark contrast to the formal attire of the court officials rushing around him. The duty solicitor, Margaret Hughes, walked beside him, frantically reviewing case notes on her tablet. "The prosecution has all the video evidence," Hughes whispered to Thompson as they waited outside the courtroom. "My advice is to plead guilty and show complete remorse. It's your only chance at leniency." Thompson nodded numbly, his hands shaking as he tried to straighten his crumpled shirt. Inside the courtroom, an unprecedented gathering had assembled. Representatives from the royal household sat in the public gallery, their presence underlining the seriousness of the offense. Several senior police officers, including Chief Inspector Barnes, occupied the front row. Sarah Chen, still clutching her phone containing the damning video evidence, sat nervously near the back. At precisely 5:15 p.m., Court Officer James Mitchell called out, "All rise," as Magistrate Blackwood entered the courtroom. Her face was stern as she surveyed the assembly before her. The atmosphere in the room was thick with tension. The Crown Prosecutor, Rebecca Stevens, stood ready with an impressively organized case file, despite the mere 2 hours since the incident. "Your Honor," she began, "we present before you a case of extraordinary disrespect and assault against a member of Her Majesty's Guard." The court watched in silence as the videos were played on the large screen. Thompson visibly winced as he watched himself throw the beer can, the footage even clearer and more damning than he remembered. The sound of disapproving murmurs filled the courtroom. Private Hayes sat in full-dress uniform near the prosecutor, his posture remaining perfectly military even in the courtroom. When called to testify, his statement was clear and professional, without a hint of personal anger or resentment. Thompson's friends had been allowed into the public gallery. Mark buried his face in his hands as the videos played, while Peter stared straight ahead, still in disbelief at how their London vacation had turned into this nightmare. "Would the defendant like to address the court?" Magistrate Blackwood asked, her voice cutting through the tension. Thompson stood on shaky legs, his voice barely audible as he spoke. "I'm deeply sorry, Your Honor," he began, tears forming in his eyes. "I was drunk and stupid. I've dishonored myself and disrespected your country's traditions. I never meant to." His voice trailed off as emotion overcame him. The prosecutor then presented evidence of similar, less serious incidents involving tourists over the past year, arguing that a strong message needed to be sent. "This behavior must be deterred," she concluded firmly. Magistrate Blackwood listened intently, her expression unreadable as she made notes. The clock on the wall showed 5:45 p.m. Less than 3 hours had passed since the incident at Windsor Castle. Thompson's solicitor made a valiant effort at mitigation, highlighting his client's clean record and immediate remorse. "My client understands the gravity of his actions," Hughes argued. "He has never been in trouble with the law before this incident." At 5:55 p.m., Magistrate Blackwood prepared to deliver her verdict. The courtroom fell completely silent. Even the usual sounds of paper shuffling ceased as all eyes fixed on the magistrate. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered as news of the emergency session spread. Journalists stood ready with their phones, waiting to tweet the verdict the moment it was announced. The sun was setting over Windsor, casting long shadows through the courthouse windows. The case was about to conclude with unprecedented speed, but the impact of its outcome would echo through the British legal system for years to come. As Magistrate Blackwood cleared her throat to speak, Thompson stood trembling between two court officers, about to learn his fate. The next few minutes would not only determine Thompson's immediate future, but would also set a precedent for how similar offenses against British institutions would be handled. The entire room held its breath, waiting for justice to be served. At exactly 6:00 p.m., Magistrate Eleanor Blackwood began delivering her verdict. The courtroom remained silent as she adjusted her glasses and looked directly at Thompson, who stood trembling in the dock. "Mr. James Thompson," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed courtroom. "This court has witnessed evidence of behavior that strikes at the very heart of our British institutions." The magistrate paused briefly, looking through her notes. Thompson's friends in the gallery held their breath. Mark had his head bowed, while Peter stared straight ahead, his face pale with anxiety. "The evidence presented is overwhelming," she continued. "Multiple video recordings show not only the assault itself, but also a sustained period of harassment leading up to it. Your behavior was not a momentary lapse of judgment, but a prolonged display of disrespect culminating in a physical assault on a serving member of the Queen's Guard." Private Hayes sat perfectly straight in his chair, his face remaining impassive as the magistrate spoke about his ordeal. Several senior military officers in the public gallery nodded in approval at the magistrate's words. While the court acknowledges your guilty plea and expression of remorse, Magistrate Blackwood continued, her voice growing sterner, we must consider the public interest in deterring such behavior. The Queen's Guard are not tourist attractions or street performers. They are serving members of Her Majesty's Armed Forces performing an official duty. The setting sun cast long shadows through the courthouse windows, adding to the gravity of the moment. Sarah Chen, still present with her crucial video evidence, clutched her phone tightly as she listened to the proceedings. Taking into account the seriousness of the offense, the public nature of the assault, the need for deterrence, and the aggravating factor of alcohol consumption on protected grounds, this court sentences you to 12 months imprisonment, effective immediately. A collective gasp echoed through the courtroom. Thompson's legs buckled, and he had to be supported by the court officers. His solicitor, Margaret Hughes, quickly scribbled notes, though she had expected this outcome. Furthermore, the magistrate added, you will be required to pay £5,000 in fines and compensation, and you are banned from entering all royal properties for life upon your release. The prosecutor nodded in satisfaction while Thompson's friends sat in shocked silence. Outside the courthouse, journalists began rapidly typing on their phones, breaking the news of the unprecedented swift justice. Let this sentence serve as a clear message, Magistrate Blackwood declared, her voice firm and resolute. Our traditions and institutions will be respected, and those who choose to mock or assault them will face severe consequences. As she concluded the sentencing, Thompson broke down completely. Please, he sobbed, I have a job back home. My family. But the magistrate had already risen, and court officers began leading him toward the cells. His friends attempted to approach him, but were held back by court staff. Mark called out, We'll contact your parents, James. As Thompson disappeared through the door leading to the holding cells. Chief Inspector Barnes spoke briefly to reporters outside the courthouse. This case demonstrates that we can and will act swiftly when our institutions are attacked. The speed of justice today sends a clear message to all visitors. Respect our traditions or face the consequences. Private Hayes left the courthouse through a side entrance, still maintaining his dignified bearing. His commanding officer later released a statement praising his exemplary conduct throughout the incident and subsequent legal proceedings. The clock showed 6:20 p.m. as the courtroom emptied. In less than 4 hours, a tourist's drunken action had resulted in a year-long prison sentence, a new record for the British justice system in cases involving offences against royal institutions. Sarah Chen, whose video had played such a crucial role in the swift prosecution, spoke quietly to a reporter as she left the courthouse. I never expected my London vacation to include helping send someone to prison, she said. But he really left them no choice. As darkness fell over Windsor, Thompson was transported to HMP Bronzefield to begin his sentence. His case would soon make headlines worldwide, serving as a powerful reminder that Britain's traditional institutions, though tourist attractions, command and require respect. The verdict would have lasting implications for tourist behavior around royal sites, leading to new protocols and stricter enforcement of existing rules. Thompson's name would become synonymous with the consequences of disrespecting British traditions, his case cited in tourist guidelines and travel warnings for years to come. The impact of James Thompson's case reverberated far beyond the walls of Windsor Castle in the days and weeks that followed. His story became a cautionary tale, shared by tour guides and featured in travel blogs worldwide as an example of how not to behave at British royal sites. Inside HMP Bronzefield Prison, Thompson's first week was particularly challenging. The American tourist, used to his tea. The international media coverage was intense. Headlines around the world proclaimed variations of tourists jailed in record time for beer attack on Queen's Guard. American morning shows debated the severity of the sentence, while British media largely supported the swift justice. Thompson's face, captured in the viral videos, became instantly recognizable. His friends, Mark and Peter, returned to Texas with a very different story than they had planned to tell. In their first interview with their local newspaper, Mark explained, We tried to stop him, but he wouldn't listen. Now he's become an international example of what not to do as a tourist. The incident prompted immediate changes at Windsor Castle and other royal sites. New signs were installed, explicitly warning visitors about the consequences of harassing the Queen's Guard. Security staff received additional training in identifying and preventing potential troublemakers, with particular attention paid to intoxicated visitors. Private William Hayes became something of a celebrity within military circles. His perfect composure during the incident was used in training videos for new guards, showing exactly how to maintain discipline under provocation. However, he declined all requests for interviews, stating through his commanding officer that he was simply doing his duty. Thompson's parents, speaking from their home in Houston, expressed shock at their son's behavior and the severity of his punishment. James made a terrible mistake, his mother told reporters, her voice trembling. We raised him better than this. We hope others will learn from his error in judgment. The case had diplomatic ripples as well. The U.S. Embassy in London updated its travel advisory for citizens visiting the UK, adding a specific warning about respecting British ceremonial guards and traditions. Other countries followed suit, incorporating similar warnings into their travel guides. Sarah Chen's video continued to circulate online, accumulating millions of views. She was invited to write a blog post about her experience, which went viral in Asia. I never expected to document something so historically significant, she wrote. It taught me about the importance of respecting other countries' traditions. Tourism companies operating in London made significant changes to their guidebooks and tour scripts. One major operator added a mandatory video about respectful behavior at royal sites, featuring Thompson's case as a warning to all visitors. The video ended with the now famous clip of him throwing the beer can. 3 months into his sentence, Thompson was permitted to give one carefully supervised interview to a British newspaper. He appeared markedly changed, his previous arrogance replaced by genuine remorse. I've had a lot of time to think about what I did, he said. I disrespected not just one guard, but an entire nation's traditions. I deserve this punishment. The incident also sparked academic interest, with legal scholars citing the case as an example of expedited justice. The speed with which Thompson was arrested, charged, and sentenced, less than 4 hours, became a topic of discussion in law schools across the UK. Windsor Castle reported a noticeable change in tourist behavior following the incident. Security staff noted a significant decrease in attempts to provoke reactions from the guards. Visitors were observed maintaining respectful distances and speaking in hushed tones around the guards. 1 year later, as Thompson's release date approached, the case was still being referenced in media discussions about tourist behavior and respect for traditions. The incident had effectively set a new standard for how similar offenses would be handled, with several other countries adopting stricter penalties for disrespecting national monuments and ceremonial guards. The lasting legacy of the Windsor beer incident, as it came to be known, was a fundamental shift in how tourists viewed the Queen's Guard. What was once seen by some as a tourist attraction to be teased and tested was now universally recognized as a serious military posting deserving of respect and dignity. As Thompson prepared for his release and deportation, his case had achieved exactly what the British authorities had intended, serving as a powerful deterrent to anyone considering similar behavior. The message was clear. British traditions were not entertainment, and those who failed to respect them would face swift and serious consequences.